Hey y'all, it's Chris, and welcome back to Creative Loops. This is my channel where I explore all things yarn, crochet, and sometimes knit. And today's video is going to be the third and final part of the robe tutorial. If you've been following along in the first two parts, we've already created the body and the sleeves of the robe, and now in this video we're going to add on the hood and the moss stitch lining. We're going to end the tutorial by showing you how to make a belt for the robe. And so once you're done with this video, you should have a final and complete robe to lounge around in and enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed these videos, and please, again, as usual, give me any feedback that you have in the comments below. Let me know what you think and if there's anything that I could have done better. And with that, let's get into the tutorial. Now, at this point, we should be done adding on all of the rows to reach the length that we want for our robe. So we won't do anything special. We won't do a row of half double crochet or anything like we did with the sleeves. We'll keep this the same. So we're going to just stop once we get to the length that we want, and we're going to go up to this area here where we're going to add on a hood now. In this area, so it's a smaller area, we're going to start crocheting in here. We're going to add some increases, so we're going to add more stitches in this area than we would normally add in order to create the hood that we want. Now, before we start to do this, I do want to go over measurements. To make the hood, we're going to create rows. So we're going to just crochet in rows back and forth until we get to the length that we need. To find the length that we need, we'll want to measure from the base of our neck all the way up to the crown of our head. So if you have a measuring tape, you'll want to use the measuring tape. If you have a solid ruler that isn't flexible, it might be a little more challenging to get the measurement that you want, because you will want to measure along part of the top of your head to get to the crown of your head. My measurements when doing that is 13 inches. So I'm going to want to continue to crochet in rows for 13 inches until I get to 13 inches, and then that is where I will want to stop my hood. Because I want to add in a few rows of decreases, I'm going to start decreases. I'm going to do 3 rows of decreases, and I'm going to do that probably once I get to 10 inches of the length that I want, so that the last 3 inches are the 3 rows of decreases that I'm doing. Now that we know how long we need to crochet the hood, it's time to pull out this base color. We start with the base color because it's easier for it to blend in if we're adding on stitches in a way that doesn't look just right. I'm starting with my slip knot here, but I want to show you first where I messed up. So you see here, I'm missing a double crochet cluster in my base color to connect these 2 rows. Somehow I skipped over this and I didn't even notice it until I was a couple of rows on the next row, and I didn't want to frog it all. But it's very forgiving when you mess up. We're going to start back up with our base color. I have quite a bit of scraps here, so I'm going to be using some of these scraps as I continue to add on these rows, because I had to take quite a bit of this robe apart when trying to fix a mistake I made. But we continue to move on and we do our best. So I'm going to grab my 6mm hook and put a slip knot on there with my base color. I'm going to find this first stitch. So you want to look for the first, or it might be the last stitch of this row, and you're just going to pull up a loop here and then turn it sideways. I am going to do my standing double crochet. You can do a chain 2 as your starting stitch, and that will count as your first double crochet. I'm going to do 2 more double crochets to complete a cluster here around this first double crochet. And notice how I'm working around the stitch that I'm working into. I'm also weaving my tail in as I go, so you see that I'm picking up and I'm using both the working yarn and my tail as I'm completing that final double crochet of that cluster. Now, as we're working into these side stitches, it's important that you don't work around the treble crochet, the treble stitch. So you'll want to make sure that you know the anatomy of this cluster, where you have the 2 double crochets bordering the center treble crochet. Make sure that you're only wrapping around this first double crochet and you're not including that treble. If you start to grab the treble crochet when you're doing this row and adding on the hood, it can start to look bunched up and it can look a bit off. If it does happen, don't worry about it. It is okay. It's a handmade garment, but try to be careful and not hook around that treble crochet. It can be a little difficult. As you can see, when you're looking on the wrong side, you don't really see the treble crochet, so you have to make sure that you're only going around that first double crochet and not going around that treble crochet. So we're gonna go back into here, and now we're going to do a double crochet around this green row. 1. I'm going to pull that tight a little bit. 2. And now 3. And we're going to continue to do this all the way around. We're going to continue to do the double crochet clusters, which is 3 double crochets into around the stitch at the end of each row. And so we're picking up these stitches so that we can start to work up the hood. Now we're getting to the part where the front and the back of the hood join. Once we get to this part, you'll see that there's kind of this standalone stitch that seems a little off here. We're going to do a cluster on both sides of this cluster here. So look at this. You'll see this is where we have the front panels and the back panels coming together. So we just worked along the front edge of that front panel, and now we're at this merge point. We're going to do a cluster here, a cluster here. And so we've just done clusters around these rows in the front, and then we're going to do it around the back. Again, on this side, we're going to do a cluster here in this opening, and then another in this opening. And then we're going to continue to work along the back the way that we just did the front side. So let's go back into this work here. We're going to do 3 double crochets or 1 full cluster. 1, 2, and 3. And now we're going to do another cluster right on the other side of this. So 1 into this opening, 2, and 3. And now we're just going to continue to do what we were doing at the start of this row and doing 1 full cluster around each double crochet at the end of the rows. So we're picking up stitches around these rows here until we get to the center, and we're going to put a stitch marker in the center to indicate where we're going to do an increase in the next row, because we're just going to do a slight increase when we start to add on the first row of color for our hood. So let's get to the center and I'll meet you there. This is what the center looks like, and we're going to put a cluster around both of these stitches on both sides of the center. 2 and 3. We're going to do another cluster right on the other side, but this is where the center is. 1. I'm going to put a stitch marker right there because this is the center, and this is where I want to make sure I pause when I'm doing my next row because I'm going to do a slight increase here where I'm going to add in some stitches. So I'm going to grab my stitch marker here and I'm going to put this right in that open space so that I remember I need to do something special once I get here. Now that I have that, so you'll see the ridge here for the slip stitch join. I'm going to keep going to 2 and 3 double crochets to finish out this cluster, and then the rest of this row is going to be the same as what we just did. So I'm going to do another cluster around this double crochet, 2 and 3. I'm going to do another cluster here, 1, 2 and 3, and now we're getting close to where the front and the back panels join again. 1, 2 and 3, and you're going to want to make sure you do a cluster on both sides of this stitch. So again, you see a full cluster right there in front of you. Add a cluster on both sides of that. So this is what it looks like on the right side. This is what it looks like on the wrong side. We're going to put a cluster here. So 1, 2 and 3, and now we're going to do a cluster right on the other side. 1, 2 and 3, and now we're going to continue to do clusters around each of these double crochets that are laid sideways in front of us, and we're going to keep doing this until we get to the end here. 1, 2, here's 2 and 3, 1, 2 and 3, and now this is a double crochet. It looks a little weird because it was a starting double crochet, but don't skip that. You want to make sure you do a cluster around here as well. So 2 and then 3 and the third one, and there you go. So this is our first row here. It does look a little bunched up, but that is how it's supposed to look. So don't worry if it looks like all of your stitches are really tight or really close together. That is just how we're going to, we're expanding the hood just a little bit, so we need a little extra room for it to wrap around our head. So we're going to do chain 2 and fasten off here, and then I'm going to weave this end in and start with our next color. As I was getting ready for this next row, our creative director himself decided to stop in to say hi.
Hi.
Now, again, this is how the first row should look after adding it onto the robe. We're going to join the next color here with a standing double crochet. Again, you can do a chain 2. Whether you're doing a chain 2 or a standing double crochet, they both count as that first stitch. I am again weaving in the tail as I go, and so I'm doing both of these strands together, and I'm going to go over here between the clusters of the first row and do another cluster of double crochets. You'll notice that I'm saying we're doing a cluster and not a treble crochet cluster. So this is still just going to be double crochets along this entire row. This will be the first row that we're setting up where we're going to do our front post treble crochets into. So we're not doing front post treble crochets with this row, but once we get to the next color, we're going to do the front post treble crochets into this row here. So this is just going to be one solid row of double crochet clusters all the way across. I'm going to do these between the clusters below, so in the space between the clusters for the row that we just did. And I'm going to keep doing this along this row here until I get to the center, where I'm going to show you how to do the increase that we talked about. We're now coming up on the center of this row where the stitch marker is. Before we get there, so I'm going to continue to do these clusters all in these open spaces between the clusters below it until I get to that center stitch marker. So looking at this here, we see that there is a cluster on one side and a cluster on another side of the stitch marker. We're going to work into that center stitch of that cluster. So right here, the center stitch of the 3 clusters, we're going to work into that open space and then the other center stitch. So we're going to do 3 clusters into this area here. One in the center stitch on this side. That's where we're going to work in first. So I'm going to go into that center stitch and do 1 double crochet, 2 double crochets, and 3 double crochets. So I did 1 full cluster into that center stitch. Now I'm going into the space between the clusters where the stitch marker is. And I'm going to do 1, take the stitch marker out. I'm going to do 2, and now 3 double crochets. Now that I did that, I'm going to do another cluster into this center stitch here of the cluster next to it. 1, so in that stitch. So we're going into the actual stitch, not the space, but the stitch. So each cluster is made up of 3 double crochets, and we're going to go into that second double crochet in that cluster. And 3. And now we're just going to continue working our way across, going back into the spaces between clusters of the row below. And so this is just going to be the same thing that we've been doing the entire time. We just did that 1 set of increases there, and we're not going to do any more increases along the hood. So every other row from now on will just be the same, going all the way across from beginning to end of each row. So I'm going to finish this row, and I'm going to meet you at the end to see what this all looks like. We're coming up on the end here, so I'm going to do my last cluster right here, 2 and 3, and then I'm going to do a double crochet into that last stitch over here. So I'm creating that space where I'm going to do a cluster in for the next row. That starting cluster of the next row will go into the space that I'm just creating right here between this double crochet and the cluster that I just did before it. I'm going to chain 2 and I'm going to fasten off. So this is the first 2 rows of our hood. They're both double crochet clusters, and they start to add on a little bit of width for this hood so it can wrap around our head. Don't worry, as you're building up the hood, it's going to seem a little, it's not going to seem very deep. We're going to continue to add on some more width once we do the moss stitch border. That will make the hood deeper, and it will make it feel like it wraps around our head better and gives us that full coverage. So if you feel like the hood's not wide enough, it's okay. We're going to make it wider when we do the moss stitch border. I'm not going to show this entire next row. I'm just going to show you how I'm starting it, because again, this is not going to be any different than the first 2 rows that we just did. We're going to use our base color. Looking at the wrong side of our work, we're going to join this on with a standing double crochet or a chain 2. And then we're just going to work our double crochet clusters all the way along this row until we get to the end. Then we're going to fasten off, turn our work, and start the next row where we're going to do our front post trebles. So I'm going to meet you there, and if you need any support with this row, please don't hesitate to go back to earlier in the video when we did our starting row. We are now ready to start our first row of front post treble crochets. So we're going to join with a standing double crochet or a chain 2. And this first double crochet or chain 2 is not going to be part of a cluster. This is going to be the first stitch that creates a gap for the cluster that we'll do in the next row above it. So we're going to just do this one standing double crochet, and then we're going to go over to this opening over here, and we're going to do our front post treble cluster. So we did a double crochet. Now we're going down to this row here. We're going around that middle double crochet. We're pulling up a loop, and we're doing a treble crochet stitch here. And then we're going to close this out with another double crochet. So similar to the stitches that we've been doing for the entire body of the row, now we're going to start doing that same pattern for the hood. So we're going to continue this, closing out this last double crochet. Included my tail in there because that's part of me just weaving that in, and now I'm going to go over here and continue to do these front post treble clusters. There's the treble crochet down to that middle stitch below. We're going to continue to pull up a loop, pull up another loop, and pull up a third, and that is our treble crochet. And then we're going to do our double crochet to close out that cluster. So again, continue to do this all the way down. There's nothing special that we need to do. We're not going to do any increases or decreases just yet. We're just going to continue to do this all the way down until we end this row. I will be alternating my green colors on the right side of my work with the cream color that I'm using as the base color on the wrong side of my work. The cream color will continue to just be the treble crochet clusters, and my greens will continue to be my front post treble clusters. I'm going to do this until I get to about 10 or 11 inches because again, I measured the total length of the hood that I want to be around 13 inches, and I want to do a couple of rows of decreasing to taper the point of the hood. So I'm gonna work until I get to about 10 or 11 inches, and then I'll be back to start showing you how to do those decreased rows. Continue doing this until you get that length that you want, and we will come back to start making the decreased rows and taper that hood so it's not so pointed in the back. And here is what I have so far. So this now measures approximately 10 inches. Again, I want a hood that is 13 inches in length. So I stopped at about 10 inches because I want to make sure that I have enough room to do these decreases that I want to do. So I'm going to start showing you how to do a couple of these rows of decreases as we go. We're going to want to first put a stitch marker in the center of this row by looking for what I call the spine and following those front post treble crochet stitches all the way up. So this is my center. I'm going to put a stitch marker right into that front post treble crochet stitch. And you can also find the center by just counting from the outside in. So if you just count the stitches from the outside in and work your way to the center, you'll end up finding the center stitch the same way. Either way works as long as you know where the center of your row is and place a stitch marker there. So when you're coming around to that, that's where we're going to start doing our decreases. I'm going to turn my work. My decrease row is going to start with my base color. So I'm on the wrong side of my work, working with my base color. I'm going to start the same way that I start every other row with my base color. So I have my slip knot here. I'm going to put it on my hook. I couldn't find my furls hook, so I'm using my Clover or More hook today. I'm going to start by joining this row here with that first stitch. I'm going to do my standing double crochet or a chain 2. Either one that you use will count as that first double crochet that we're working with for our cluster. And we're going to continue to just do our double crochet clusters all the way down to the center. So once we get to the center, right before we get to that stitch marker, we're going to stop, and I'll meet you there and start showing you how we're going to change things up just a little to start tapering that hood in. We are almost to the center, stitch marker here, so I'm going to continue to do one more cluster, and then we're going to take a look at what we have. Here is where we are. So I'm at the space right before the stitch marker. I'm not going to put a cluster in here. I'm going to just put a double crochet into the space. I'm going to do another double crochet into that center stitch where the stitch marker is, and then I'm going to do one last double crochet into the space next to it. So 1, 2, and 3. What this is going to do is it's going to replace the clusters that I was doing before. I'm basically taking 2 of the clusters and creating one. So here's the first double crochet. Here is, I'm going to take the stitch marker out. Here is the second double crochet. And I'm going to put my stitch marker right back into that double crochet. And now I'm going to do one more double crochet into this space. And so when we look at this, it's basically creating a separate cluster. I'm turning 2 double crochet clusters into one. And this is going to just tighten that row up a little bit. Now I'm going to go to that next space, and I'm just going to continue doing my clusters all the way to the end. So 2 and 3 into this space here. And I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3 into this space here. And again, I'm just going to continue doing this all the way to the end of the row, and I'll meet you at the beginning of the next row. Starting this next row, we're going to again do it the same way that we've been doing the rows before, doing my standing double crochet or a chain 2, which counts as that first stitch in our clusters. And this is going to be the first stitch of this row is not part of a cluster, but I'm going over to this next space to start that front post treble crochet cluster. We're going to continue to do this all the way down this row until we get to that center area again where our stitch marker is, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do differently here that will continue to decrease for us and create that tapered look that I'm looking for. So continue working these front post treble crochet clusters all the way through to the middle, and I will meet you there. Here we are right before this area where we have 3 single double crochets. I'm going to put a double crochet on each side of this group of double crochets. So here's my first double crochet, and then here's my second double crochet. And so I just put a single double crochet both on the side of this group. I'm going to move the stitch marker right to that space there, so that will now indicate the center for me. And now I'm going to go to that next space between the clusters, and I'm going to continue my front post treble crochets. And this is the only thing that I'm doing different in this row. So I'm going to continue to work these front post treble crochet clusters all the way to the end. And this is what the hood looks like so far. And so when you fold it up, you can see that it's starting to taper instead of coming to a point. We're going to do one more row of a decrease, and then I'm going to start to seam this together and close up the hood before we start working on the moss stitch border. So I will meet you once we get to the middle of the next row. So the next row again is going to be with our base color. It is only going to be double crochet clusters all the way until we get to the stitch marker. Once we get to the stitch marker, we're going to come back together, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that final row of decreasing. We are now coming up on the space right before that stitch marker. We're just going to do a double crochet right here on the one side, and then we're skipping the space where the stitch marker is, and we're going to do a double crochet right into that space next to it. So there are the 2 double crochets for the row that we just did are right on the outside of the 2 double crochets of the row below. And now I'm going to continue to do the clusters going all the way to the end of the row. And once we get to the end of the row, I'm going to fasten off, and I'm going to come back to show you how to do the slip stitch join again to close up the top of the hood. This is what the hood looks like right before we start to seam. So you'll see here, this is where our decreases were, and so it started to taper a bit, and this is also the center, so I'm going to pinch this close because I want to go under both of those stitches. So there are those 2 double crochets right there that we're going to go under both of those stitches together, and we're going to do a standing single crochet. So I'm going to go under both of those, and I'm doing a standing single crochet to start this seam. Now I'm just going to go through the front and back loop of these stitches. So I'm going through the front loop of the stitch in front of me and the back loop of the stitch and behind it, and now I'm going to pull up a loop, pull through, and that is my slip stitch. So front loop, back loop, pull through the loop and pull through the loop, front loop, back loop, pull all the way through. You'll want to make sure that these slip stitches again are somewhat on the looser side, because we don't want the top of the hood to start bunching up or curling in. So keep these a little loose so that they can have some stretch and give to them. Slip stitches are already pretty tight, so you do want to make sure that you're not pulling it too tight, and continue doing this all the way down until you get to the end. We're coming up on these last 2 stitches, so we're going to go through both of these stitches here, and we're going to pull up a single crochet. So instead of doing the slip stitch, this final stitch will just be a single crochet. I'm going to fasten off now, and then we're going to take a quick look at the hood, because now we're basically done with the hood. The next part of this tutorial will be the moss stitch border, but let's take a look at what the hood should look like now that we've finished putting the finishing touches on it. Now that we have this portion of the hood complete, we're going to start working on the moss stitch border. We want to put some stitch markers to indicate where the hood starts and ends so that we can do some increased rows. We'll want to put the stitch marker right before where we added on the first row of the hood, and it's easy to see. It will be kind of that top row of front post trebles will kind of point right to it, and you'll want to do it on the other side as well. So these stitch markers will indicate again where the hood starts and where the hood ends. So as we're doing our moss stitch border, there's going to be 2 rows where we increase, and we're going to add in a couple of rows across the hood to make the border on the hood thicker than the border around the rest of the robe. I'm going to start the moss stitch border on the right side of my robe in the corner. So having the right side of the robe facing me where I can see all of those front post treble crochets, I want to start in the corner so that I can create the corner stitch and hide the join a little bit easier here. But This is also very important to note. We're starting with the moss stitch border, so we're going to go up a hook size. For most of the robe, I was using a 6mm J hook. I'm now using a 6.5mm K hook. So I'm going to find that stitch, the first stitch in the corner, and I'm going to join using a standing single crochet. And then I'm going to chain 1 and 2. This is creating my corner. So all of my corners are going to have a chain 2 and then 2 single crochets inside the same stitch. So I did my first single crochet, I did my chain 2. Now I'm going to do the second single crochet inside that same stitch to create that turn. And here is that second single crochet. For the moss stitch, it is a single crochet and chain 1. So I just chained 1. Now I'm doing a single crochet into the side of that double crochet and I'm chaining 1. I'm going into the side of the next double crochet, doing a single crochet and chaining 1. This is going to be the pattern that I use when I'm working into the sides of double crochets. Each double crochet will have a single crochet and then a chain 1. And then I'll go to the next double crochet, single crochet and chain 1. So continue doing this moss stitch pattern along the entire side of this robe until you get to where you actually can work into the tops of your double crochets from the clusters that you were working. But for now, it's just a single crochet, chain 1, go to the next double crochet and do a single crochet into the side of it and chain 1. You're wrapping around the entire double crochet. You're not going into any loops, you're just wrapping around the entire double crochet with these single crochets and chain 1s. So let's continue to do a few together. This is what it will look like, and notice how it cleans up the edge there too. It creates a much cleaner border, so even if we weren't adding on an entire border, just this moss stitch row alone helps make this look so much neater. So we're going to continue to work on this all the way along here until we get to the next section where we can work into the tops of our double crochets. Now we are to where we can actually start to work into the tops of double crochets instead of the sides. So what we'll do is the traditional moss stitch, where you work into the stitch, you chain 1, you skip the stitch below, and then you work into the next stitch. So what we'll do here is, looking at the tops of these stitches, we're just going to work into the tops of these stitches. Chain 1s will count as a stitch, and so that's why you'll skip the stitch below when you chain 1 and then go into that next stitch. So single crochet, chain 1. We're not going to go into the stitch right below that, we're going to skip that stitch and go into this next one. Single crochet, chain 1, skip the stitch below, single crochet, chain 1, and then we're going to continue to do that. Skip that, go into this next stitch, single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain 1. We're going to continue to work the moss stitch all the way until we get to our hood, which is marked by our stitch markers. So continue to do this all the way until you get to that first stitch marker indicating the start of your hood. Coming up on our first stitch marker here, we're not going to do anything just yet other than move the stitch marker to the new row that we're just creating here. So I'm going to do a single crochet in here, and I'm going to take the stitch marker out and put the stitch marker right into the stitch that we just made. Right in here. And now we're back to the sides of double crochets. So we're back to working into the sides here, where we're going to do a single crochet and a chain one into the side of each double crochet. So similar to what we were doing at the bottom portion of our robe, we are going to continue to do this along the side of the hood that we just made. So here's a single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one. So we're going to continue to do this all the way along the edge of this hood until we get to the second stitch marker. Once we get to the second stitch marker is when we're going to start doing something different. We're going to do a slip stitch, we're going to turn, and we're going to add in a row, and then we're going to do it again and add in a second row. So continue doing this and we'll get to our second stitch marker and we'll see what we need to do next. We are almost to the second stitch marker, so I'm going to continue to do this moss stitch, chain one, and now that I am at the stitch marker, I'm going to go into this space here and I'm going to do a slip stitch. I'm going to now chain one, and then I'm going to turn my work and move my stitch marker to that new chain one space that I just created. So I'm going to take this off. And now I'm going to turn. After chaining one and turning, we're going to want to put a stitch marker back into this chain space that we just created, because this is going to now be our new space that we're going to start working in when we come back around. We're going to do a single crochet into the chain space below that we created before slip stitching, and now we're going to continue doing the moss stitch all the way back around to that very first stitch marker. So single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one. We're just going to continue working all the way back to that first stitch marker, where we're going to do another slip stitch and then turn. So meet me back there and we'll do that together. We are now back to the chain space right before the stitch marker. I'm going to slip stitch in there, I'm going to chain one, and now I'm going to take my first stitch marker and I'm going to put it around the chain that I just created. Again, this is going to be the chain space that we'll work into when we do our next row. Once I turn, I'm going to do a single crochet back into this chain space that we just created. So I'm going to turn my work, and we're gonna work back into that chain space and do a single crochet right there. Now this space that we have the stitch marker in, again, is where we're going to do a single crochet when we do our next row. I'm going to chain one and just continue the moss stitch, single crochet, chain one, and continue this all the way across the top of the hoodie again. Single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one. So just continue this until we get to that next stitch marker. We're going to continue doing the moss stitch past that next stitch marker, but I just want to show you where to put the stitches in case you get confused with that slip stitch. We're working our way back to this second stitch marker at this point and finishing out this second additional row that we've added to the hood. Now I'm going to continue the moss stitch, doing my single crochet, chain one. Now the stitch marker is in a chain space, so we're going to put a single crochet into that space where the stitch marker was, and I'm going to single crochet here, and then I'm going to chain one. And now I'm putting the stitch marker where this chain is. Now we're back to the double crochets clusters. I'm going to skip a stitch, a single crochet, chain one, skip a stitch, and then I'm going to continue to just do this moss stitch. So single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one, single crochet, chain one, and I'm just going to continue doing the moss stitch now all the way around the rest of my robe. Once I get to the corner, that is where I'm going to do the single crochet. I'm going to chain two and then do a single crochet right back into that corner stitch. So I'm going to show you how I do that once I get back to that point. Stick around with me and we'll do that together. Otherwise, just continue doing the moss stitch all the way around until you get to where you started. Here we are coming up on this corner. I'm continuing to do my moss stitch around these last few double crochets, single crochet, chain one. Now I'm going to go into the top of this double crochet stitch that I just did a single crochet around. I'm putting a single crochet in there. I'm chaining two, one, two, and now I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to go right back into that stitch. So if you're looking at the stitch this way, you'll see I'm already have a single crochet in there. Now I'm going to go right back in there, single crochet, and then I'm just going to continue the moss stitch, chain one, skip a stitch, single crochet, and this will bring me right back to where I started along the bottom of my robe. Now that we're back to where we started, we're going to continue to work our way to that starting single crochet, or the joining single crochet, where we're going to just slip stitch to join. So chain one, and now I'm going to go right into that first stitch, and I'm doing a slip stitch, and then I'm just going to fasten off. So when we end the rows here for our moss stitch, when we're done working with that color, we will slip stitch to join and then fasten off. The next color that I'm going to use, so I only did one full row around the entire robe with my base color here. I'm going to do two full rows with my next color. So this was the first time that I only did one row. The next color, I'm going to start on the wrong side. If you notice, we joined this color on the right side of our work. We're going to join the next row on the wrong side of our work, which is opposite from what we've been doing before, and we're going to continue to do one more row of increases on the hood. So I'm going to continue to show you how we do that. Stick around. Starting with our next color, it doesn't really matter where along the edge of the robe you start to join because you won't really notice where it is. I continue to do it at the bottom middle kind of area of my robe because I feel like it's easier for me to start and end at the bottom of my robe. So just do your standing single crochet or chain one to start and do a single crochet, but then once you do that, just continue to do the moss stitch all the way along the border of the robe until you get to that first stitch marker. Once we get to the first stitch marker of the hood, then we're going to continue to go along the top of the hood until we get to that second stitch marker, and then we're going to do an increase row going back and then an increase row going the opposite way again. If you're having trouble with the moss stitch, just remember that the single crochets go into the chain space from the row below, and the chain goes over the single crochet that was in the row below. So you're basically alternating single crochets into the chain spaces, and then the chain spaces are going over the single crochets from the row below. So it starts to fit in like a puzzle. Once you're doing the moss stitch and you've done a couple of rows of it, it really does start to look like it's woven together, and it's more of like a puzzle pieces coming together. I love the way that that looks, which is why I often add it to a lot of my garments. Coming up on our first stitch marker, we're going to continue to do the moss stitch. So single crochet, chain one, single crochet, keeping in mind that the stitch marker is in a chain space. So we're going to single crochet into the space that the stitch marker is in, and then we're going to chain one, and we're going to move the stitch marker to the new chain one stitch that we just created. I like to keep the stitch marker in chain spaces because it helps me keep track of where I'm doing my final stitch for those increase rows. Now, this first stitch marker is just the indication of where the hood starts. I'm not going to do an increase just yet for this row. I'm going to continue until I get to my second stitch marker, and then that is where I'm going to start working my way back and doing the increase. So continue to do the moss stitch all the way along the top of the hood until we get to this second stitch marker, and then we'll come back together and do our slip stitch and turn to create these extra rows. And here is our second stitch marker. Keeping in mind the stitch marker is in a chain space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitch after I chained one. I'm going to slip stitch into the space where the stitch marker is. And then I'm going to chain one. I'm going to put the stitch marker over this chain one stitch that I just created. Now I'm going to turn my work, and I'm going to single crochet into that chain one space that I did right before the slip stitch. And now I'm going to continue the moss stitch, going all the way back to that first stitch marker. Once I get to the first stitch marker, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to slip stitch into the chain space that the stitch marker is in. I'm going to chain one, and I'm going to turn, and I'm going to put the stitch marker over that chain 1 stitch that I just created. We're going to do that together once we get there, so don't stress out too much. If you don't remember, just meet me on the other side once we get to that stitch marker. Now that we are up to our stitch marker again, we're going to continue our stitch, so single crochet, chain 1, and now I'm going to slip stitch into the chain space that my stitch marker is in. I'm going to take this stitch marker out. I'm going to chain 1 again. I'm going to put the stitch marker over this chain. Now I'm going to turn my work. And now I'm going to single crochet into the chain space that I created right before slip stitching. And now I'm working my way back. This is my last increase row for my hood. I don't plan to do any more increases on my hood. If you do want a bigger, deeper hood that kind of goes over your head a little more, feel free to continue to add on a few more rows of increases as you do the border, but I feel like this is perfect for the hood size that I'm looking for, and I think you might be happy with it too if you liked the size of the hood that I had on my initial robe that I showed off. We're going to continue to do this moss stitch all the way to that stitch marker that we have. We're going to move the stitch marker up to a chain space, and then we're just going to continue to do the moss stitch all the way around until we get to where we started. We're not going to fasten off because we're going to do one more row of this color. So I'll meet you at the stitch marker before we finish this row completely. As I mentioned, we're just going to continue the moss stitch here, so keep in mind that the stitch marker is in a chain space, so we want to do a single crochet into the space that the stitch marker is in. We're going to take the stitch marker off, and I'm going to move it back to this chain space over here just because I want to know where my hood started. I'm not doing any more increases or decreases, so the location of where I put my stitch marker doesn't really matter. I'm just going to continue doing the moss stitch now all the way down until I get to where I started with this color. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, chain 1. Just going to continue working my way around the exterior of the robe. Now that we're back to the point where we started this color, we're going to finish doing the moss stitch, and now I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to slip stitch to join to the first stitch of this color. I am not going to fasten off because I'm doing one more row of this color. So I'm going to do this slip stitch here. I'm going to chain 1. And I have a stitch marker here just to indicate the start of the row for me. I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to move this stitch marker so that I know where my first stitch is. I'm going to put it around the loop I have on my hook so that now that when I do my stitch, my first single crochet, it's already in that stitch. Now I'm chaining 1, and so I'm just going to do the moss stitch going all the way back around. I'm going to come back on to show you once I get to the hood, so I can show you what we need to do once we get to the slip stitches. We're in the home stretch, y'all, so we're coming up on this first stitch marker for our hood. We're going to continue doing the moss stitch as we get to that. Now the stitch marker again is in a chain space, so though it is a slip stitch, it's in a chain space, so we're just going to treat that like a place where we're going to put a single crochet. I'm taking the stitch marker out, and I'm just going to continue to do the moss stitch with the single crochet and chain spaces, and that space where the stitch marker was in will have a single crochet. I'll do another chain, and then I'll single crochet into that next chain space that we have in the extra row that was above that. So as you see here, there's that chain space, single crocheting. So I'm just going to continue going all the way around. I'm going to meet you back at the second stitch marker just to show you what I'm going to do there as well, but other than that, it is really just the moss stitch going back and forth at this point. As you can see, the stitch marker is in a chain space, so I'm going to continue to do the moss stitch, single crochet, chain 1, and now I'm going to single crochet into the space that the stitch marker is in. Right here, I'm just going to push my hook in there and single crochet. It's a little tight because slip stitches are tighter. And now chain 1. Now I'm going to continue going forward through all of these chain spaces with single crochets. I'm going to chain over the single crochets from the row below and continue moving the moss stitch forward all the way to the end of the row. Once I get back to where I started, to the stitch marker for that first single crochet of this row, I will slip stitch to that and then fasten off. Here is where the row begins. So again, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to slip stitch, so I'm going to pull through everything, and now I'm going to fasten off. I'm going to weave in this end and then start working on the base color again. Here we are with the base color. Again, it doesn't really matter where you join on here. We're going to join on the wrong side because we're going to end this color on the right side, just like we ended the last color on the right side. So we're joining, and then we're just going to continue doing the moss stitch all the way around. So nothing special this time around. This is just going to be a row of moss stitch, so single crochet and chain stitches. Once we get back to where we started this row, so where I just put this stitch marker, we're going to slip stitch to join, we're going to chain, and then we're going to turn our work and do one more row. So we're going to do 2 rows of this color, and we're going to turn each row. So I'm not going to show you the entire row. I will meet you back here once I finish both of the 2 rows with this color. If you need any assistance with the moss stitch, feel free to go back into earlier clips of this video and watch as I do the moss stitch for when I start some of the other rows. But I will see you when I'm done with this color. We finished 2 rows and we're back at the start, so I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch to join where I have this stitch marker. And now I'm going to fasten off. I'm going to weave these ends in, and then I'll meet you back here where I'm going to start my final color. We're going to do one more color, So we're going to just do 2 more rows. Again, it doesn't matter where you join this color. I'm joining at the bottom center of my robe, as long as you're making sure that the wrong side is currently facing you when you're adding on the color for the first time. I'm going to throw on a stitch marker here just so I know where my row begins, and I'm going to continue to just do the moss stitch going all the way around until I get back here where I'm going to slip stitch to close out the row. I'm doing 2 rows of this color. So once I come back to the start of this row, I'm going to slip stitch to close the row, and then I'm going to chain to start the next row, and then single crochet into the chain spaces below, and continue the moss stitch going in the opposite direction until I get to the end of the row again, where I'm going to slip stitch to close that row and fasten off. I will meet you at the end of that second row where we'll be done with the border for this robe. Now we're coming back together for the final stitches of this robe. We still have the belt to do and the loops, but this is the final stitch of the body of our robe. We're gonna chain 1, and now we're gonna slip stitch to join, and we will have completed the entire border, and it's ready for us to wear if we don't want to put a belt on it. Now that we've finished the body of the robe, if you want to put a belt around the robe, we'll want to add 3 loops around the sides and the back, as well as crochet the belt itself. We'll want to identify where we want to put the loops for the belt by putting on the robe and trying to look to see where it feels more comfortable for us based on where we would want to have a belt on our body. I'm about to insert a video showing you how I identified where I want to put the loops, just so you can see for yourself what might look good for you based on where I'm putting it on me. Once you put the robe on, you'll want to see where it feels more comfortable to have a belt. I prefer to have my robe belts right above my hips, so I'm feeling where I want the belt to go, and I'm keeping an eye on what color that row is. So for me, it's right here. You can add a stitch marker to make it easier for you to spot. Now, if you've been following along on my community post, you already know that I finished the robe a while ago and then had to take a good chunk of it apart because the video that I had filmed just did not look good. If you want to see the horrible takes that I have, stick around to the end. I'll throw some of those clips in. But I say all of that because the robe that I'm working on right now does still have the belt loops attached. I already had woven in most of the ends, and in order to take it out, I might have had to cut something. It would have been too difficult to take off. So you'll see that I already have some of the loops on right here. What we're going to do though is I'm going to go through how to add these loops on so that you can see what I did while I still have these here, that you can see how it looks finished. All I did was create some chain stitches and attach the chain to the robe on both ends, and then wove those ends in. It wasn't anything special. You could make a thicker loop by doing some chains and then single crocheting or slip stitching into those chain stitches to make the loop a little bit thicker. I didn't want it too thick. I wanted to have the belt loops just be the plain chain stitches, and so that's what I have here, and that's what I'm going to show you. Here are the two belts that I've already made. The one that is primarily orange and yellow I made for the rainbow robe that I initially showed off earlier this year. The green one is the one that I created for the robe that we just did in this tutorial. However, I had to redo all of the video footage because my hands just weren't in frame the entire time. So rookie mistake, but definitely learned my lesson there. I'm going to redo a sample of this for you all just so you can see and learn the techniques that are used to create this belt. The orange and yellow belt is already steamed. I've steamed it and washed it a couple of times, and so once you steam it, the curling goes away completely. If you don't have a steamer, just completely wet block the belt. I know it can be difficult because it's a long piece of fabric once you crochet it together, but if you wet block it, you will get the same loosened fibers, and the fibers will go into place, into the place that you want it to go into, a lot easier than if you just don't do anything with it. If you don't do anything with it and you don't mind the curling, then definitely by all means just leave it as is, but it will curl up on you and it will stay like that even after a wash if you don't steam or block the belt. To know how long you want the belt to be, you'll want to look at the width of the robe. So when you did your measurements and you were looking at the width, and for the width, for me it said 24 inches. To use the belt the way I want to use it, I'll need the belt to be 3 times as long as what I have here for the width. Now, you don't need to have the belt as long as that, as long as the 3 times the width, because for me that will be 72 inches, and that will be way more than I'll need, but I like an oversized belt for a robe. You don't have to do that. You can measure around your body, the widest part of your body, and then go a little bit over to account for the being able to tie the belt into a knot or a loop around your waist. However long you want the belt to be is however long you should make it. For both of my belts, I made the chain about 72 inches. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to do approximately 20-25 chains so that we can demonstrate the stitches that are involved with this belt. I'm going to go ahead and continue to do my chain, but again, for you, I would recommend chaining approximately 3 times the width or to the size that you prefer based on the measurements you have. Also, a quick note that we're continuing to use our K 6.5mm hook for this belt. As you're chaining, you'll also want to make sure that you're keeping these chain stitches somewhat loose, because we're going to be working back into both sides of this chain stitch. So we're going to work into the front loops and the back bumps of these stitches as we're making this belt, and chain stitches can be pretty tight, so in order to be able to work into them comfortably, you'll want to have them a little loose. You could also go up a hook size and do the chain stitches with the hook size that's a little bit bigger than the 6.5. I'm going to go into the second chain from my hook, going through the bumps, and I'm doing single crochets into every back bump. And so if you didn't see what I was doing there, if you go back, I show off how to look at the front versus the back bumps of a chain row, and we're looking at the back bumps as we're going forward, just doing these single crochets into the back bumps. You can do the single crochets into the other loops that are a part of the chain stitch. However, doing them into the back bumps makes it easier for you when you're going around the outside of the robe when we're doing our last row, because it'll look just like regular stitches. And you'll know what I mean when we get to that part later on in this video. So I'm just continuing down the row, doing single crochets into every back bump of the chain. Once you get to the very first chain stitch, you'll continue to do one single crochet in there, and this is what it looks like. So your chain, if you've kept the stitches a little loose, you should be able to have a little give to it. The top and the bottom both look like the regular loop of a crochet stitch, and so we'll be working into both sides of these eventually. For now, I'm going to chain one, and I'm going to fasten off. I'm going to weave in these ends later on, so I'm not going to weave this in just yet, but I am going to grab the next color that I'm going to use. I'm going to put my hook through this loop just so I don't get lost with which side is the right side right now. It really doesn't matter which side you start to work in, but I would prefer to work into the side that I just finished. So I'm taking my next color here, creating a slip knot. I'm going to take my hook out, keeping an eye on that first stitch, put the slip knot on my hook, and now we're going to do a standing single crochet into this first stitch here. We're going to start doing the moss stitch, so I'm going to chain one. I'm going to skip the first stitch that's right underneath that chain, and I'm going to go to the next stitch and do a single crochet in there. We're going to continue to do the moss stitch going down, so chain one, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain one, skip a stitch, single crochet. So we're going to continue doing this all the way down the length of the belt. Once we get to the end, I'll let you know what we need to do to start working on the next row. Now if you got to this part and you did a single crochet and you only have one single crochet left, that's perfectly fine. Don't chain, just do the single crochet into that last stitch. When you turn and start your new row, you're going to single crochet into that stitch anyway, and then you'll just be able to chain and continue doing the moss stitch from there. So don't worry about it, it will perfectly be fine. I still have 2 stitches left, so I'm going to chain, skip a stitch, and then work into this last stitch that I have here. I'm going to do my single crochet. I'm going to do the next row, so I'm going to chain to go up the next row. That chain does not count as a stitch, so I'm going to single crochet into that very last stitch. I'm going to single crochet again into the chain space. So see, it would work out if you had an extra stitch or not down at the row below. Now I'm going to chain one. I'm going to skip a stitch and go into the chain space and continue moving forward with the moss stitch. So chain one, single crochet into the chain space, chain one, single crochet into the chain space. So we're going to do this all the way down to the end, and once we get to the end, we're going to fasten off and we'll start a next color. So I'll meet you at the end. This is the third and final color that I'm going to be adding on to the belt. Because this color we're going to border around the entire belt, it doesn't matter where you add on, just find a chain space and then do a single crochet into that chain space. So I'm going to go right into here, making sure that's a chain space. You can find the chain spaces by giving it a little tug, and there'll be a little hole for the chain spaces. We're going to go in here, do a standing single crochet, and now we're just going to do the moss stitch all the way around. Chain one, single crochet, chain one, single crochet. We're going to continue to do this until we get to the last stitch, and then we'll do a corner stitch. single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, chain 1. Now if you don't have another stitch to skip, you can single crochet into that last stitch. Otherwise, continue to chain, skip over that, single crochet. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. We're going to turn and we're going to single crochet right back into that same stitch. I'm going to do a single crochet on each color. So I just did a single crochet on the color I'm working on. I'm going to go into that second color there and do a single crochet. I'm not doing any chains. I'm going into this last color and then last stitch, and I'm going to do a single crochet. I'm going to chain 2. I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to single crochet right back into that same stitch. And that's the corner. So now I'm working along the bottom of the chains. So there aren't chain spaces to work into. I'm going to have to work into each chain stitch. So I'm still going to do the moss stitch. So I chained 1, skipped a stitch, single crocheted. You'll notice as I'm doing this that even my chain stitches are a little tight. So it's a little harder for me to get my hook in there at some points. So it's important that as you're creating your chain stitches, you are keeping them as loose as possible so that you can work into them again. I know that can be tricky to keep them a little loose while still keeping them uniform, but try as best you can. Working our way back to the next corner, we're going to do the same thing where we're going to single crochet into the last stitch, chain 2, turn the work, single crochet back into that stitch. We're not going to do any chain stitches along the side. So I'm going to work into each color. I'm going to work into this light green color again, single crochet there. I'm going to do one more single crochet into this darker green. Now I'm going to chain 2. And I'm going to single crochet back into that last stitch of the darker green. And now I'm going to finish the moss stitch along the rest of this row. Once you get back to the start of this row, you're just going to slip stitch right into that first stitch. Pull it all the way through, and then we'll fasten off. So we'll cut off, pull that through. And now we'll just have to weave in these ends. So again, I was just making a smaller sample to show you the techniques you'll need to use to make the belt, but you'll want to do this for the entire length of the belt, and once you're done you'll weave these ends in. So you can weave in this top end through these top stitches, and on the back here you can take these smaller ends and weave them all the way through these rows, matching the colors with the matching colors. So that is the final tutorial for the crocheted robe. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you were able to make it all the way through. If you did encounter anything that was challenging or have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can comment on these videos or you can post in my community tab. I will try and respond to every comment that I see. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial, and give me any thoughts that you have. Again, this is my first full tutorial. I welcome all the feedback that you can give me on how I can do better as we move forward with any additional tutorials. And with that, keep those creative loops going. I'll see you next week.